These adventures began on my family's farm in South Texas during the late 1980s and early 1990s. I was maybe 8 or 10 years old when this started. My original memory of the specific time period is slightly twisted due to my age at the time, but the rest of the contents of the experience are as clear as day in my mind. At the time, I knew nothing about aliens, abductions, or anything like that. I'd seen science fiction, Star Wars, and E.T., but I couldn't connect what I'd encountered to the fanciful beings represented in those films. At the time, it was not something I was particularly interested in. I didn't become interested in or know much about extraterrestrials until I was 12 or 13 years old. Perhaps my encounter fueled the want to learn more. The farm itself is 200 acres in size, with 3/4 of it open fields, and the remainder a combination of grassland and moderately forested sections, as well as a small creek running through the center of the property. These areas are split into paddocks using barbed wire and electrical fencing. 3 residences sit on 1-acre lots, east to west, atop a tiny hill in the property's front northern corner. I live in the center house with my immediate family, including my uncle and great-grandparents, who were still alive at the time, with homes on each side. My grandparents' dwellings are at the end of the row leading to the rest of the land. A couple of barns and assorted outbuildings exist at the end of the row on another acre. Overall, the residential component of the property is around 4 acres atop stated hill, which overlooks the rest of the property. This will be useful when I provide instructions and such. It was late evening at the end of summer, early August, and I hadn't started school yet. They must have occurred around 11:30 or midnight because the adults in my family at the time were older and went to bed shortly after the 10 p.m. newscast in the central time zone. My average bedtime is 9 p.m. Naturally, I'd stay up much longer, reading books or watching TV with the light and volume dialed down. I wasn't asleep, so this couldn't have been a dream or sleep paralysis. Another family member saw me awake in the house immediately following this experience. In any case, once I was certain that the adults had gone to bed, I went to the kitchen for a drink of water. As I stood at the kitchen sink, I looked out the window and noticed a bright orange glow at the bottom of the southwest hill. We had a barn fire the year before, so I assumed there was another fire, but there was no smoke cloud or smell of smoke. Curious, so I strolled out of the kitchen and into the adjacent corridor leading to the rear door. I walked outside to see what was going on before running around and waking everyone up. Immediately, I recalled that my dogs did not rush out from beneath the porch to meet me. They didn't even follow me through the yard. It was oddly silent as I walked through the backyard. There are no cicadas, crickets, or other typical nighttime sounds. I don't think I noticed it at the time, but in retrospect, it stands out in my mind. I strolled to the back of our acre towards the light. I was practically forced to continue walking towards the abnormality. I hop over the gate into my great-grandparents' yard, then to the back fence at the top of the hill. I pulled myself to the top of the fence and witnessed something I will never forget. The brook goes through the bottom of the hill. On the opposite side, a little egg-shaped craft stood upright. The front of the craft featured a big oval-shaped hatch that was open. The orange glow was coming from inside the craft, but it flowed out and filled the entire region. I recall the light pulsating out in a type of corona, like staring at a street light with water in your eyes. The craft itself was a silver metallic tint, yet it was matte rather than bright, and it did not reflect light as expected. It was probably 10 to 12 feet tall and about the same width across the bottom, tapering to about 3 feet in circumference at the rounded top of the egg. It was supported upright approximately 6 inches above the ground by what I assumed was a tripod of metal legs that came straight out of the lower sides of the ship, rather than apparent ports like an aircraft. They were just around a foot in length. I couldn't recollect any additional lights on the outside. The sole source of light was coming from the hatch. In retrospect, the ship itself reminds me of a drop pod or something seen in science fiction films. It did not strike me as something you would use for daily travel. As I sat there, a small entity about 3.5 feet tall appears as a black, lighted shadow in the doorway. It exits the craft and appears to be collecting soil or plant samples before returning inside. He did this several times while I watched from the top of the hill. It didn't appear to notice me. This is when things go crazy in my mind. The creature initially resembled, and I mean this literally, an Ewok, but without clothing. It appeared little and hairy from the distance I was studying it. I was on the fence for about 2 minutes or so watching this monster do his work. At some time, I decided to leap down and begin walking down the slope to get closer. I recall being more excited than terrified because in my young mind, this was like something I'd seen on TV come to life, and I was the only one watching. As I make my way down the slope, I become aware of something off to the right, back over my shoulder. It's the whoosh of something coming up behind me from the other side of the fence. I turned to look back, and the sound of a tin metal smash echoed through the night. I recognized instantly that something had just gotten through a crack in the fence near the gate that my uncle had filled with a sheet of tin metal. I see a blur race by me, and I turn to watch it as it speeds down the slope toward the craft. The other entity stares up the hill at me before scurrying into the ship as the other one approaches. I start running down the slope, attempting to catch up with them. My memory leaps, and I'm standing on the other side of the creek in front of the vessel, peering at the open hatch. One of the animals walks out. At this moment, he resembles a fluffy Ewok-like creature. But the fuzzy shell dissolves, and what stands in front of me is best characterized as a short gray. One thing to note is that it did not appear exactly how it is described in most mainstream culture and media. The skull was enormous, but not in the stiff, angular teardrop shape. Rather, it resembled a human head, albeit slightly more bulbous. It reminded me of the Watcher from Marvel Comics, but more of an enlarged embryo head. The eyes were huge and human-like, but without the sharp edges seen in popular portrayals. They resembled sugar glider eyes, which are nocturnal and not fully black. They just had incredibly huge pupils that were dilated to let in as much light as possible. This is the closest way I can describe them, and it makes logical sense to me given that they usually function in the dark. It had little openings for nostrils and a hump on the nose, a small mouth, and no teeth that I could see. It opened its mouth but didn't say anything. Its physique was small and had a modest build, similar to what you see in media images. The only thing I can say about them is that they appear light and fragile, yet their movements are graceful and meticulous. Long arms, long fingers, incredibly slim legs, and little feet split in the middle, similar to ninja shoes. It wore a form-fitting, fold-tight bodysuit consisting of a black, very dark gray, or extremely dark navy material with a faint metallic sparkle that did not absorb or reflect light. They had 5 thin fingers. The one outside the craft wore gloves, whereas the other did not. It could have taken them off, as the one outside did later on. They were both wearing typical military-style boots with no laces that were split like ninja shoes. As the hairy appearance faded away, it looked intrigued by my reaction to see it in its actual form. I now realized that it was most likely studying my subconscious thoughts and attempting to disguise itself as this Ewok in order to either deceive me into believing I had dreamt it, or to lull me into a false sense of security so I would not be terrified. In any case, I wasn't terrified and even waved and said hi. When I spoke, the other thing leaned back out of the hatch and gazed at me, while the one on the ground smiled and glanced back at his partner. They began generating what appeared to be mild chirping or clicking sounds. They appeared to be having a lengthy chat about how I might see their true forms. I wasn't panicking out about what to do with myself. The person inside the craft did not appear to enjoy my presence. He appeared a little spooked out that I had arrived, and judging by the way he sprinted down the slope, I can't blame him. In any case, the one on the ground must have persuaded him to let me stay for a while, since he basically simply left. All right, whatever you say, deal with it, and don't claim I didn't tell you if he begins freaking out. When you think about it, it's both funny and humanizing. So he approaches me and says hello. This was done telepathically, as I subsequently discovered, but I didn't recognize it at the time because I was speaking to him in my normal, physical voice. But his voice was in my head, and it seemed no different than if you and I were talking at the dinner table. It's a little difficult to describe, so I hope you understand. I asked him what they were doing out here. He informed me that they were taking samples. I asked him where they were from, and he said they came from a long way away, but they are closer than we realize. He stated that they visit frequently and keep an eye on everything. He told me that they were on a research mission. I asked him if I could help. He pondered briefly before saying, "Sure." He returned to the vessel for a while and emerged with a cylinder and a small metal tube. He kneeled down and signaled for me to approach closer, which I did. He took a little metal tube and pressed the bottom sides. The end of the tube expanded up like a bird's beak. He scooped up some earth from the ground and snapped the tube shut. He then took the cylinder, and I noticed small holes at the top. He slipped the tube into one of the holes, and it clicked into place. He takes another metal tube, opens the end, and hands it to me. I do what he did and try to close it, but I can't find the mechanism on the sides. He seemed amused by this, so I handed it to him. He informs me it only works for them, then snaps it shut and inserts it into the cylinder. We repeat this several times, with me scooping the dirt and him closing the tubes and inserting them into the holes, until we have filled the cylinder. As he puts items back in the craft, I start searching around for other things he might be interested in. I hand him a few stones containing flint and tell him they're my favorite sort. I pull up a couple of plants and tell him about them based on what I know. He seemed above it all, yet because I was a child, he amused me regardless. I tell him I'm good at catching frogs and crawfish in the creek and ask if he wants one. He stated that they do not accept biological specimens and that this was not their department. They were searching for components. At this point, I should remind Owl that they had fallen on top of an area where my uncle had buried some of the barn fire wreckage and debris the year before. Over the years, various old refrigerators and other metal items were buried there as well. It was a miniature landfill. The ground in the region was still fairly barren and newly dug. I suppose this is what led them to this exact location, a significant concentration of metal beneath the ground. We probably spent approximately 30 to 45 minutes taking samples. After we finished, I asked if I may look inside. He told me I could look, but there wasn't much to see. He told me that a much larger ship was waiting for them, and he pointed to the sky. He turned and entered the vessel. I started to take a step higher, but the other one stopped me. The first one urged me to look around, but not to go in too far or touch anything. I leaned in through the doorway and craned my neck around to see everything I could. The craft appeared larger inside than it did outside, but only slightly. Of all, everything is relative to our size, and I was a child at the time. The walls were stark white and concave, mirroring the egg-shaped facade. I looked up at the ceiling and saw where the light was coming from. The spherical core of the ceiling was vividly lit with a golden-orange light. It was blinding if I looked too long, yet the interior was considerably darker than the dazzling glow outside would suggest. There was a low, shallow shelf around the middle edge of the walls. The sample canisters were stored in recesses on the shelf. There were also some cube containers that I believe held larger samples of stuff, but we never utilized them, so I'm not sure. To one side, the shelf bulged out, revealing a control panel with 2 chairs, similar to little bucket seats adjacent to each other, each sitting on a single pedestal. There were no buttons, switches, or anything on the panel. What is most remarkable is that there were flat touchscreen panels, similar to those found on modern tablets. There were symbols and things on the panel screens, but I couldn't figure out how to recreate them. Directly above this control panel, there was a recessed region that was flatter to the wall, but darker than the rest of the wall. This was a form of port or window that allowed you to look outside the craft. This window was roughly a foot high and 3 feet wide. The first being taps a touch screen, and the window opens, allowing me to look outside. It did not appear to be visible from the outside of the craft. I yelled, "Wow!" and it popped closed again. At this point, the first one informs me that it is time for them to leave. They have already taken too long and will most certainly be chastised for allowing me to assist them. I asked him if I may join them. He informs me that they cannot do so at this moment. They are not permitted to return biological material, as he previously stated. Furthermore, I would not be able to exist for long because they provided little nutrition for me. I recall asking him what nourishment meant, and he said they didn't have anything for me to eat. I told him I could go back home and prepare a snack. He stated I'd need more food than that. I told him I liked pizza and suggested we go get some. He seemed to find my insistence amusing, but his companion appeared to be annoyed, and he informed me it wasn't possible and that he'd drive me home. The next thing I remember is that we're back in my house's hallway, standing just inside the rear door. The creature thanks me for my efforts and says I was a good helper. I inquired if he'd be back for me. He told me I was too young just now. Maybe in a few years they'll be back. I was defiant and told him I really wanted to go. He said just wait, then instructed me to hurry up. He definitely needed to depart because they can't stay in our atmosphere for very long. He actually stated atmosphere, but when I asked him what that meant, he responded something about the air and climate, which I didn't understand at the moment. He just seemed to get quite anxious about being in my place. Then he backed up and exited the house, right through the back door. I turned around and returned to my room through the hall. Just then, one of my uncles, who was staying with us at the time, opened a door to the room next to mine and questioned what I was up to. I told him I was getting a sip of water and started telling him about helping this little man I met in the backyard. He groggily tells me that I left the kitchen light on and that I should go back to bed. It's 3:30 in the morning. He then slams his door shut and returns to bed. I go into the kitchen to switch off a light, but it is not on. The glow from the craft is still visible from outside. I look out the window for a while, and after a few moments, the light fades, and I see a greenish-white bolt of light shoot up into the sky from beneath the hill. It's dark again, so I turn around and walk back to my room. I didn't sleep the rest of the night and waited until the morning rose. In the days that followed, I tried to tell my family what I witnessed, but no one seemed to believe me, of course. My uncle informed me that he saw me awake that night and believes I went outdoors again. Back then, I'd slip outside to play with the dogs or stargaze. My folks just warned me to stay inside, something about the boogeyman, blah blah blah, the standard parental advice to avoid venturing outside late at night. My late grandmother was the only family member who ever believed in me. She informed me she'd seen them before, but she said they were angels. She was a devout person who, near the end of her life, would talk of seeing angels and had a collection of angel knickknacks. As I grew older and had more interactions with these beings, I talked about them with her, but she always referred to them as angels. I also spent a lot of time returning to the landing location, seeking for any clues. I kept this charged air in the area for very some time after the incident. Cows often avoided this region as well. My uncle set up a feeding cage near it for a while, but he had to move it since the cows refused to touch it and the hay rotted. He got a mule a few years ago, and whenever he's in that paddock, he'll stand some distance away from that plot of ground and bray in that direction. If you tried to lead him over to it or near it, he would resist and kick back, so I did not bother trying again. This particular uncle has not heard my story. My cousin has discovered a few maimed calves and goats on the farm throughout the years, but not in this particular field. Very unusual indeed. I've had a few interactions with what I assume were alien beings. I'd learn more about them, not only through books and media, but also from the entities themselves. As previously stated, if anyone has read this entire page and is interested in learning more about my experience, I am happy to share. I am currently in my mid-30s. I no longer live on the farm, but I visit frequently. When I think about it, I go to that location by the stream to seek for evidence of their return and to check if they left anything behind. So yet, I only have memories of my experiences. Needless to say, I remain suspicious, but I am more of a believer now. I am a very rational and practical guy. I do not like nonsense. I even despise the concept of the supernatural or aliens. I don't watch fantasy movies or read fiction in general. I don't care if you believe it because I've made it apparent that I'm not sure if I should. This occurred roughly a week ago. I needed some time to think about this first. I'm a bit panicky, so I needed to calm down before I could write anything. I was traveling home from work at night, as I usually do. It was around 11:45 p.m., and there were few people on the roadways at that time. I'm basically lost in my thoughts because it's just another day, and I'm going about my business as usual. I notice a red light and stop as usual. I stop, then continue driving. A second later, I approach the exact light that I had just passed. It was something I had heard of quite some time ago. It's a phenomenon in which some people believe they have been time warped. For the most part, I didn't give it any thought. Why? Because, as I already stated, I wasn't paying careful attention, and perhaps I just imagined it. I was like, whatever. In fact, I'm still not sure if this bit is relevant to what happened subsequently. But here's where things get interesting. I go to bed as normal. Nothing had transpired before that point. I get up at 3 a.m., drink some water, and then return to bed. I think I fell asleep shortly after that, literally moments later, because it is easy to fall back asleep in general. As soon as I fall asleep, it feels like I'm waking up on an extraterrestrial spaceship. To be clear, I do not dream of aliens. In reality, I've never experienced a dream concerning aliens. Monsters? Sure. Weird stuff? Of course. But no aliens. Not. I never think about aliens. I don't research them, and I never cared. I need to make this point here. For me, there is a clear distinction between feeling like I'm dreaming and reality. I would not mix it up. I felt as if I wasn't dreaming. I felt like I was in a waking state the entire time. I wake up with my arms spread out at a 90-degree angle from my body. Straight up, my wrists are shackled by a translucent plastic-like material. I'm not sure if it's plastic, but it feels like it. However, it is transparent and clear. I don't see any aliens around me, and I am absolutely alone. The room I'd describe is relatively small. Interestingly, I sense cushioning behind my head, as if I'm lying on some sort of gel-like material. Cold but not too hard. Now, the way I feel at that time is similar to how you feel after being sedated in the hospital. I also feel cold in general. I could feel a lot of things, but my head remained immovable. But the issue is, I wasn't thinking clearly. I feel odd. I feel drowsy, but I don't feel like I'm dreaming. The funny aspect is that I've been laying there for literally minutes. It feels genuine. This is not how time moves in dreams. Something constantly happens in dreams. Then I hear a sound similar to the sound when a door opens in the game Doom, although it's lower pitched and preceding it. Yes, dear readers, this is when aliens walked in. They strolled in quickly and I did not hear any footsteps. Perhaps their movement style differs from ours, but this is what I assumed after the event and some reflection. The next thing I know, there's a jittery extraterrestrial peering down at me. He is now moving extremely quickly, not just in terms of his movements, but it appears like his entire being is faster. It's virtually impossible to describe. It's almost as if I knew he was fast, but I didn't presume it. The understanding entered my consciousness as if it were a fact. Yes, it appeared similar to grays, as people describe them. The eyes were huge. Since then, I've read a number of extraterrestrial stories, and some claim I wasn't terrified. I was completely afraid. I could see the intricacy on its skin, as if it were a phony photo, but imagine it was the real thing right in front of you. Now, there was one above me, staring directly at me, but there was at least one more because I could feel him stroking my skin. Now you realize how, when you see a phony extraterrestrial, they move strangely and blink too slowly to be credible. I could see minute movements in the sky, similar to those of a live organism. I could see little muscles in its face and whatnot. It never blinks anymore, and I don't think it has eyelids. These aliens came in and accomplished something really swiftly. I was just staring at this dude for a few seconds when they knocked me out. Here's the next section. Usually I wake up about 7:30 a.m. I'm not a heavy sleeper. I awoke at midday. This has never happened in my life that I can recollect. Anyway, that's the plot of my dream, or so I tell myself to stay sane. Thank you for reading, and I would be delighted if you had any questions, which I would do my best to address. I'm a 27-year-old male from Italy who relocated to Argentina 6 years ago. Until recently, I had a fairly normal existence with no significant paranormal occurrences. The only memories I have are of being a boy and hearing an asexual voice whisper my name vehemently at night. Aside from that, since I was 11, I've been researching UFO sightings, aliens, general mysteries, and even cults. I've never practiced anything. I simply study and continue to do so because I enjoy it and have no specific aspirations. Coming to the point, I'll report back here on what I wrote in my diary back then. First instance, September 15th, 2015. I can't remember the time, but it was night. Given the outdoor light, I'm probably dreaming after 4 a.m. or almost 5. I'm going carelessly through the square of my natal city. Suddenly, a child dressed in red and blue approaches me and asks for directions on his map. He explains that he needs to know where he can hide because someone wants to kidnap him. He appears agitated, but he watches me closely, apparently hoping for a speedy response. I don't recall exactly what I said, other than that kidnapping was a bad thing and shouldn't happen. Nobody should allow it. As I spoke to the child, I realized I was in a dream. Just like it happens to others, you will understand at some time that you are only a spectator in a dream and can stop yourself from doing so. When I realize this, I feel my mouth biting something as the dream ends. It's like violently biting something made of meat and holding it in place with my jaw. So, I wake up and open my eyes. I'm lying belly up in my bed. To my left is an extraterrestrial with a massive head and a slim physique. He is not particularly tall, but I believe he is of low to medium size, very similar to a gray, with ashen pink complexion. His right arm is extended towards my blanket, which is the limb I am biting. The extraterrestrial has a sorrowful expression. His eyes, jet black, are pinched, and I have a blackout just after that scene. I wake up in the morning with no memory of anything other than this. Second instance, day December 15th, 2015. I don't remember what time it was in this case either, but it was probably close to the first because the penumbra was similar. I was dreaming. I'm in a large green area that I don't recognize, surrounded by trees in the distance. I'm not alone, and I appear to be the leader of a large group of individuals. I yell at them, pointing quickly towards the woods to my right, stating loudly that they can't stop them, the people who are fleeing, and that many will be spared. Strangely, this is another dream about a kidnapping incident. Here, as in September, I realize I'm in a dream and a spectator. This time, I'm even conscious that when I wake up, I'll discover an alien next to my bed. I got a strange sensation of jeopardy and exhilaration, similar to how I felt in September. So I wake up and open my eyes. I have it behind me because I was laying on my left side on the bed. I tilt my head to observe a portion of his torso, almost defined and slim with some sort of abdominal muscles, not human-like, but highlighted by the pale skin color and ashen. When I saw it, I instantly closed my eyes and squeezed them. My body is shaking within, almost as if I were a ball of nerves, ready to burst into fear and adrenaline. But I attempted to withstand the situation. I started thinking about something peaceful, detaching myself, and the easy things I would have done tomorrow. I attempted to ignore the creature behind me and slowly relax my body. While I was doing this, I felt a gentle touch on my hair and a radio effect in my right ear. It was similar to a radio disturbance without a channel. After a brief period of bewilderment, I began to hear a voice that was apathetic and sexless, strange, and chatting. I didn't recognize the language. I didn't understand a thing. It was this voice talking, accompanied with radio interference. Then I experienced another blackout. I awoke in the morning, always remembering this. Third case of the day, 15th March 2016. It was night, of course, but I didn't have time to open my eyes and look at the light outside my window. It happened again, although this time in a less direct manner. I don't recall the dream exactly, but I was with other individuals in an urban setting on the side of a desert road. I'm not sure why, but we were eventually controlled by a few of people, one of which was a police officer. I'm not sure why, but when I saw him, I had the impression that you were an alien hiding behind human form. The policeman stared at me with amazement and admiration, followed by a malevolent sneer that quickly gave me the same sense I got in previous incidents. A sense of danger, a strange sensation inside my body, almost like a radar signaling that something is wrong near me. The identical feeling I got when I first came into contact with these beings. I can't recall anything else at this time. Just as the dream was coming to a close, I blacked out and did not wake up. I have no idea what happened in the middle of the night. I understand the difference between reality and the dream world, and this actually occurred. If you have any similar experiences or responses, please let me know. Smithfield, Rhode Island, July 22nd and 1992. My friend and I were finishing off an evening friendly-based tournament. We spent between 3 and 9 p.m. at the Smith & Sales Reservoir. The fishing picked up as the contest came to a finish. So I persuaded my friend to go back out for a night bite. Around 11 p.m., we were fishing near the end of a peninsula facing the shore with a dark vacant house on the land. It was quite calm, but I assumed a helicopter was coming down in the cove behind the house, which we couldn't see, but there was no noise. I waved to my companion, but when the lights dimmed, we said that a vehicle's lights had come down the road and backed away, but we never saw a vehicle. We kept fishing towards the shore in full view of the house when I observed what appeared to be children playing with torches, rushing frantically through one of the house's rooms through the windows. My fishing companion and I concluded that people must have returned home, despite the fact that we saw no cars or people and that the power had been turned off in the house. We continued fishing, and soon, immediately, despite the fact that we had never seen or heard anyone, there was an abnormally tall human-shaped figure with a small, child-sized human-shaped figure at the water's edge, the larger one carrying a flashlight, and looking for frogs and other creatures. The unusual thing was how they illuminated, almost like a glow in the dark. But we rejected it since the torches were curiously reflecting back at them from the water. We were startled out when we observed approximately 15 to 20 lighting-shaped figures on the coast facing us, all of different sizes, and there had been no noise the entire time, and we were close enough to hear someone strolling in the brush near the shore. Just as we were growing worried and considering leaving, the first large human-like thing had a spotlight that shone directly at our boat. My buddy said, "Start the motor and get out of here," as I began to set the choke and pull the cord of the small 5-horsepower outboard motor. The torch levitated across the 30 to 40 yards of water while I kept half an eye on it and started the motor. When it turned over and I put it into gear, I looked up and saw the light about 8 feet over our small boat. I never looked back, and it was only a 3-minute trip back to the boat ramp. We hurriedly threw the boat into the vehicle and entered in shock. Every dog in the lake was barking loudly. We'd never heard a dog before this. My pal made me pledge not to tell anyone, which I haven't done until now. First, I'd want to emphasize that I've never been interested in aliens or UFOs. I've always been frightened of the whole affair. I recall seeing signals when I was 12 and being afraid for weeks, but I dismissed this phenomenon as science fiction until I witnessed something that I assume most of you would not believe, which is great. I'm putting my story here because I haven't discussed it with anyone and feel compelled to share it. 3 months ago, I went camping with a friend in a rural area of Northern California. I'm a huge wilderness enthusiast. I've been camping my entire life, and I spend a lot of my leisure time hiking, rock climbing, hunting, etc. A friend of mine who appreciates the outdoors wanted to go up to the Sierras for the weekend and invited me to join him. It was our second night, and we were seated by the fire. We were not staying on a campsite. We'd hiked about 10 miles from our automobiles to a clearing with a breathtaking vista. He'd stayed here once before. It was around 10 p.m., and we were eating and gazing at the sky. He got exhausted and went to sleep in his tent. I intended to stay awake for a bit, and around 45 minutes after he went to bed, I noticed this object emerging from the valley below. It was a basic flying saucer shape with many circular lights circling around the edges, changing colors repeatedly. I was completely shocked. I watched it for about 15 seconds before realizing I needed to get him up so he could see it and not think I was insane. I stood, and when I looked back, the creature had vanished. When I yelled out his name, everything went horribly wrong. When I was called out, I did not hear my own voice. Everything was absolutely silent. I could move my eyes, but not my body. I remember noticing that the fire had fully frozen. Everything appeared like a picture, as if time had stopped. Then there was a bright flash, and I blacked out. I awoke later, just as the sun began to rise. I was outside, shivering in the dirt next to the long-extinguished fire. I felt as if I had been completely inebriated in this haze. I sluggishly called his name a few times, and he emerged from the tent. He was perplexed, to say the least. I tried to describe what had happened, but my memory was so murky that I couldn't articulate it. We left in 30 minutes and were completely silent on the drive back, drifting in and out of sleep for 7 hours. He dropped me off at my house, and I slept for almost the entire day. A few weeks later, I was fiddling around with an amp, and it made this static sound when I unplugged my guitar. For some reason, the music sparked my recollection, and I recall everything. When I regained consciousness, I was suspended laterally in this circular apparatus, comparable to Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. These translucent glass-like shackles were keeping me in place. I was absolutely naked, and 3 typical grays were standing over me. They were around 4 feet tall and wore white spandex-like costumes. 2 people were just standing there, monitoring the other, who was taking blood from a vein under my armpit with this strange-looking syringe. They didn't express a meaningful reaction, but I could tell they were shocked that I was awake. I could only move my eyes and mouth. I was also afraid, with my pulse hammering from an adrenaline rush. I can't tell you how terrified I was, but I was also quite indignant. I wanted to kill them. I wanted to rip out this item and thoroughly ruin it. My brain got completely primitive, just animal instincts, and I could know they all felt my rage because they all took a step back at the same time. I'm 6'3" and weigh 185 pounds, and I was attempting to appear as scary as possible, which is ludicrous given that I was utterly immobile and thus completely harmless. 2 of them disappeared from my view, likely leaving the room. The other one was staring at me without expression. I desperately wanted to close my eyes, but I forced myself to gaze straight back at it, trying not to blink. Then the 2 grays returned, and they were no longer alone. I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing behind them were 2 incredibly tall human-like entities, a male and female, that resembled Norse gods. They both had brilliant golden hair and large eyes. The males were dark blue, while the ladies were violet. I presume they were what the UF community refers to as Nordics. This seemed odd to me. My family descended from Sweden, and I am very Nordic in appearance, with blonde hair and blue eyes. I understand this is a cliché, but I heard a feminine voice in my head. For some reason, I could understand what she was saying, even though she wasn't speaking in English. It's difficult to describe, but I just knew. She told me something like, be calm. So you're not in danger? I relaxed and asked her what they wanted from me. She explained that they were simply checking up on me. I nearly passed out after hearing that. I inquired what she meant. She claimed they had saved me when I was born. I immediately understood what she was talking about. I was born almost 2 months prematurely. My mother was really ill during labor. We both had fevers of 104. The funny thing is that the physicians had no notion what was wrong with us. I was given 2 spinal taps. My mother was given 3. I spent 4 nights in the bubble housing ICU. There was a reasonable probability I might die. Then one day, I began to feel better and eventually recovered completely. The doctors were concerned that the entire incident would have permanently ruined my body and possibly my brain, but I was fine. I asked her why she saved me. This time, I heard a deep male voice say, "This is a conversation for another time." I asked him if they were humans. He answered, "No." I was perplexed since they were extremely human. I asked if a man had come from them. He answered, "Yes." that aliens arrived 200 years ago and created humanity by merging their DNA with that of our monkey forebears. I wanted to know why they resembled me more than other humans. He claimed that many males of their species found female humans appealing and mated with them. This immediately passed on some of their physical characteristics to Nordic peoples. I wanted to know more, but they declined, saying it was time for me to return. I blacked out instantaneously and awoke next to the extinguished campfire, still dressed and shivering. I understand that this sounds stupid and unbelievable, yet it did. I do not know what to do. I've been absolutely lost since the experience, but submitting my tale has already brought me some relief. Feel free to ask any questions, and I will respond to the best of my ability. Since this happened, I've been researching a variety of theories about alien-human relationships almost nonstop, and I want to talk about them. I will not conjure up any memories with the usual rubbish I see or read about, and there will be no anal probing, examination tables, or bright lights sucking me into flying saucers. Those events just did not occur as far as I can recall. Throughout these experiences, I'll use bang to denote the sudden and uncontrollable loss of consciousness. This is how it felt anyway, bang. Ages 3 or 4 from 1972 to 1973. My memories of the events that occurred at this age are hazy, and I have lost much detail over the years. But even after almost 40 years, I can recall some details with great clarity. These events are not necessarily in chronological order. I know this age range is true since I grew up in a tiny mountain village before my family relocated to the city when I was 5 years old. I frequently experienced dreams, or what I believe were dreams, of several persons standing at the end of my bed, generally 4 or 5 in a tight group. I recall they had radically various heights, stood immobile, and were tiered, with the shortest in front, like a family waiting for the photographer to eventually take their picture. I never saw their faces, and I don't remember what clothes they were wearing, if they were even wearing clothes. And I stare at them and they'd look at me. These nightmares would always finish with a loud sound like the crash of something breaking, compelling me to glance away and toward the sounds, only to wake up in the morning. I used to be afraid of the folks in the corridor at night. I'm not able to elaborate further on this. I was just 3 or 4 years old, and this could have been a typical monster beneath the bed childhood terror. One night, I remember anxiously attempting to wake up my older brother. I was shouting at him to help and to wake up, shaking his arm and shoulder. He wouldn't wake up, even though I tried as hard as a 4-year-old could. Bang! I was standing in the corridor, crying. The hall light was on, and I was wearing faded yellow one-piece pajamas. They featured a single long zipper from the neck to my left ankle, and the footies had cheap plastic soles. Why can I remember what I was wearing? I'm not sure, but it's a pretty clear memory. My parents came out and soothed me with the hackneyed, "It was only a dream. Now go back to bed." This final memory from this age may not be related, but it is quite distinct and has stayed with me. I was playing under my father's wooden desk in the living room. I don't know what time it was, but it was definitely during the day. I don't remember precisely what I was playing or doing, but I was having a great time under a desk, as any 4-year-old should. A life-size wooden carving of an owl standing on a tree stump was across the room, visible from a desk fort. My mother had several owl figurines and various owl decorations throughout the house. I gazed at it and it moved its head to face me. That's all I remember about it. Why would I have such clear memories? Was it a legitimate hallucination, or was it simply a child's overactive imagination? Ages ranged from 5 to 14, between 1974 and 1983. These recollections are equally as hazy, but they are definitely distinct from my previous ones. I started seeing more detail, and I was mostly awake, sometimes not even in bed. Again, these may not have been in chronological sequence, but I'll try my best. My family currently lives in a comfortable middle-class home in a big metropolis. My brother and I still shared a room, which was great with me. He was my big brother after all. He's a large guy, 13 years older than myself. He was always courteous to me and treated me well, but due to our vast age difference, we never bonded quite the way brothers and sisters do. I still looked up to him no matter what. For years, the folks at the end of my bed have been having the same dreams. Not every night, but frequently enough that I became afraid of falling asleep. When I was in first grade, I believe, we were assigned to draw something we were most afraid of. I drew myself lying in bed, with my face facing out the window. This was the standard stick figure sketch that only a 5-year-old could produce. I don't need to describe how the face in the window looked. I do not recall any incident or event that prompted me to draw it. I just drew it. As expected, I brought home all of my schoolwork and reviewed it with my mother. As expected, the most of it was met with the half-interested but fake interest to make it appear that I am serious about first grade schoolwork. That's nice, sweetheart. What I didn't realize at first was that my mother had kept that drawing for years. She never kept any of the other artwork I brought home. Why that one? I recall seeing it dozens of times on the desk or in the filing cabinet until I was in my late teens. One day, it was simply gone. I never found out if she eventually threw it away or simply struck it better. I asked her about the drawing multiple times, and she always recalled it but said she didn't know where it was before changing the subject. My brother joined the army and my father was upset. The Vietnamese War. My father's generation was still thinking about the war, even though it was almost ended. I believe my father was so angry because he had previously served in the army and was well versed in combat. He didn't want to lose a son. I had no idea what was going on until the day my brother packed his belongings and went. I found myself alone in my room for the first time in my life. My parents organized a small gathering of their friends to play pinochle, drink, and laugh. These gatherings were uncommon but not unheard of. They frequently spilled out into the backyard because no one in my family smokes, but a few of my father's acquaintances smoked. I would use the opportunity to run about the backyard late at night. The cool, damp grass felt great under my feet. I essentially played a game of hide and seek by myself. I'd run and hide behind a bush or tree, giggling for a moment before running to the next amazing sight. Yes, I was readily entertained, and I still am. One enormous bush proved to be an ideal location because it was just out of reach of the porch light but close enough for me to hear my father and his friends talking and laughing. I stood behind the bush, gazing into the branches and leaves, only to have a face turn and stare back at me from approximately a foot away. Yes, the expression. This is the first time I recall seeing that face in such depth. Those eyes were deep and black with no shine or reflection. There were no visible eyelids. The head is slightly leaner and taller than what I've seen others sketch. I don't remember anything else about the nose, mouth, or ears but those eyes. I shouted, raced to the porch, and burst into tears while informing my father about the face. He smiled, and just to amuse me, he got a flashlight and went into the bush to look. He laughed harder and invited me to come take a look. I was afraid, but I trusted him. It was a caterpillar. No way. What I saw was a caterpillar. No crazy way. No. For years, my fear of the dark and sleeping made me physically ill. I was so emotionally depleted on a regular basis that I became socially isolated and had only one friend throughout elementary school. I was bullied, No, tortured every day in school. From 3rd to 8th school, I was constantly tripped, kicked, shoved, knocked down, books thrown, personal goods taken or broken, hair pulled, ears flicked, kicked in the balls, stabbed with pencils, and verbally assaulted. I'm sure I left out most of the details. I do my best to forget about this period. I try to get aid from my instructors and parents, but I'm always encouraged not to fight and to turn the other cheek. I could not have defended myself, even if I had wanted to. I didn't have the strength or desire because I couldn't sleep well at night. By this point in my life, I was crying myself to sleep most nights into my pillow as softly as possible because everything was my fault, and I didn't want to raise any questions. Just stay quiet, I urged myself. I developed an interest in electronics, computers, and all forms of technology. I used to break apart old radios, televisions, and whatever else I could get my hands on. I would even desolder all of the electronic components from the boards in the hopes that I may reuse them in future builds. After a night of burning my fingers and destroying components with a cheap Radio Shack soldering iron, I went to bed. Something physically jerked me awake, and a voice said, "It's hot." The voice sounded deep and monotone, not artificial, but also not normal. Imagine Morgan Freeman speaking it without emotion and with great timing. "It's hot." I could feel my adrenaline start pumping from panic. What? Who? Shit! I leapt out of bed and dashed to my desk to disconnect the soldering iron, which was now lying on the floor. Why was it on the floor? I know I had it on the stand. I unplugged it, put it in the stand, and started crying. There it was, a massive hole in the carpet where the soldering iron had burned through. Damn that! I was prevented from using soldering irons for months. My father became irritated one night when I kept my room light on all night and prohibited me from using it after bedtime. I was far too humiliated to request a nightlight. I did the next best thing. I plugged an old-fashioned toggle switch into my floor lamp's power line. This was so I could keep the light off until I couldn't handle it any longer and had to turn it on for a quick glance. Every night, I clutched the power switch securely in my palm, my thumb on the toggle, waiting. As a side note, this is extremely dangerous because I was holding the main line in my hand all night, with nothing but a badly wrapped wad of electrical tape around it. Do not do this. Not long after my brilliant installation of a remote switch for the light, I drifted off, grasping it securely, only to awaken in the middle of the night. Standing next to my bed to my right was a diminutive figure, about 4 feet tall in comparison to the height of my mattress. It appeared humanoid. 2 limbs, torso, and head, as normal. I couldn't make out any specifics except that there was a shadowy silhouette. Where's the switch? I dropped it while asleep. Looking down, I noticed it laying on the mattress next to me. Grab it. Place your thumb on the toggle. Bang! I awoke the following morning. There was no problem with the switch, and I was not electrocuted. I used the switch for a few years after that without any problems. For approximately a year, I had nosebleeds on a regular basis, perhaps once or twice each month. I suppose I was 12 or 13 at the time. Everyone mentioned iron insufficiency. My friend would mock me and attempt to help me stop them with absurd home treatments. "Put a penny under your tongue," he said. What? They gradually stopped on their own. I'm not sure how these are related. It happened, and I remember it. Nothing much occurred after that. However, the dreams remained. The same dream. By this stage, I had grown accustomed to and even anticipated them. High school was attended between the ages of 15 and 18, from 1984 to 1987. The first few years of secondary school were largely satisfactory. Bullying had been reduced to verbal abuse, and was no longer occurring on a daily basis. I was sleeping better by this point, so I felt more healthy and happy overall. By my sophomore year, I had made a few friends and began to feel like things were starting to get better. I met a girl during my junior year, yes, a real-life human girl. This was the happiest few months I'd ever experienced. We went through the standard high school dating routine at the time. We watched TV together, went to the movies, and visited the mall. She had some anger control difficulties, but she was definitely more mentally prepared for life than I was. She was perfect, and I loved her wholeheartedly. Even now, I think of her and grin. 1987, the mall. I was walking with my partner down the middle public walkway of this mostly indoor retail complex. I just froze in horror. My body began to tremble, and my heart raced in my chest and ears. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. Except for what I was looking at, everything else in the mall melted away. I noticed a book prominently displayed in the window of a nearby bookstore. The book was the most scary thing I'd ever seen. No, wait. I've seen the book cover before. Yes, I remember. I've seen it in person. Looking at me from the bushes next to my bed through the window and stood at the end of my bed in 100 different nightmares. The title of the book was Communion by Whitley Strieber. I will not seek for it, but you are welcome to Google the original book cover of that book. It isn't precisely what I observed, but it's near enough. I had never seen the face before. My fiancée understood a little about my background, but she had no idea how much seeing that face would paralyze me with horror. She started dragging me away. Thank you. I couldn't bear looking at it anymore, yet I was paralyzed and unable to move. I must have looked stupid standing in the mall, staring at a book and bawling my eyes out, with my girlfriend yanking on my arm and saying, "Let's go!" Let's go. I progressively started to decline again. The dreams had not stopped for years, but I was able to forget them so quickly. Now they are definitely on my mind in the morning. Every time I saw that face, it brought back memories from all those years. All the dreams, the face in the bushes, the bullying, I spent years weeping myself to sleep. Damn that. Damn the book, damn that face. I was quite thrilled. Age range 22-46. 1991 to 2015, I lost myself and my girlfriend. For years, I avoided people and social situations. Miraculously, I met another girl who appeared to tolerate me, and we finally had 2 children together. Everything was generally fine. The occasional strange dream that is too vague to remember. The fear of the dark still exists, but I've learned to live with it. I eventually separated from my children's mother and joined the Army at the age of 36. That wasn't an easy task at 36, but I completed it. 4 years was sufficient. Check off the bucket list item. Check. Permanently damaged back. I inherited the cat from my ex and really appreciated her company. She was a good lap cat who would come dashing for affection and snacks whenever I called her name. 40 years old and equipped with a high-quality, energy-efficient nightlight. Yes, I finally received one, age 47, 2016. This was only last year, and I recall watching a Blu-ray on a 4K monitor with Dolby 7.1 surround sound. This will be my final entry in the most detail because it was still so fresh in my mind. It has been years since I had such nightmares. I had to mention about 15 years of peace. I am still afraid of the dark, so I have pushed my bed into the far corner of the room. I need those 2 walls to feel safe. I normally sleep with my head on one wall and my body against the other, tucked into the corner. I also need a huge bed to create space between me and the rest of the room. The nightlight was blazing brightly against the wall, as if to protect me. Due to my now bad back, I occasionally flop around on the bed and change positions while watching a show or movie on television. When I'm finished viewing, I'll always go back into the corner and cover up for sleep. One night, I was lying with my head open to the room while watching television. I wasn't thinking about it, and I'd forgotten how awful it feels to be exposed in that way. I fell asleep, laying on my stomach in the prone posture. I was partially awake as my hair was tugged. "Stop," I said to my cat. I assumed my cat was licking my hair to poke at me. She liked to play about a lot. "Stop." I reached out and brushed her away. "Wait a minute. That is not fur. It feels like skin." I touched the arm for a moment and realized it was most definitely skin. It's so soft but solid and tight against the small arm. I looked up. There it was again, standing there with its arm in my grip. I glanced at the face but couldn't make out any details. I could only see the contour of the head. It was like watching a performance when the faces are blurred for anonymity. I tried for what seemed like an eternity to finish waking up and focus on the face before realizing why I was attempting to see it. "I don't want to watch that. Turn away and it will be over. Get back to sleep." I believe these were my own thoughts. So I carefully turned away, lowered my head, and closed my eyes. I felt a peculiar tingle throughout my body. Not again. Please. Not again. Bang! I awoke the following morning. This experience was so vividly remembered in my mind that it almost felt like it was still taking place. I worried and looked around the room, which was now bright with morning light. Nothing. It was over. Within a month, my cat developed breathing problems and began having seizures while sleeping. Why is this happening to my small kitten right now? Is this related? Did he do anything to her? She battled it for nearly 2 months before passing away while trying to breathe. I consoled her and regularly supplied sweets and bottled water in those final days. She enjoyed drinking bottled water right out of the bottle cap. Damn, I miss the cat. But now I'm in my room, alone,